The question of the day is Kanban versus Scrum. What is the difference? Kanban is less prescriptive than many other agile approaches, as you'll see. It has a start where you are approach, and teams can begin using this and progress towards other agile approaches as needed. Now, let me show you what this looks like very simply. I used a Kanban board to execute my personal work many years ago. In fact, I ended up writing 12 books by using this Kanban system. Very simple. I knew I needed to do many things. For example, I wanted to start off with item 2, but I had to put a framework around it. And this framework comes in the form of a simple table, but trust me, it works like clockwork. When you are serious and intentional with the work you move into doing, you know, I'm writing book 2. That was my life, writing book 2. And when I got done writing book 2, it needed to be edited. So while my editor was working on book 2, I started working on book 4. Now notice they are both in the doing column. And most Kanban boards, they have a very simple to do, doing, done arrangement, or waiting, in progress, and completed. You can create a lot more complicated, complex Kanban boards with all sorts of bells and whistles. But if you're looking to get started, I challenge you, try the to do, doing, done. Got done with book 2. She started editing book 4, started writing book 1. At the end of the day, everything ends up getting to the done column. And you're also limiting the work in progress. You don't want too many things in doing. You want to limit the work in progress, and the calculations and theories about that, but I don't want to go into that. And honestly, that is the very simplistic view of a Kanban board. Now, as I said, there are many other views to Kanban boards. You can have more complicated looking ones with more columns, but that's it in a nutshell. Kanban is a Japanese word meaning signboard. It focuses on limiting work in progress to identify issues and minimize waste. Start where you are, refine as you go. I love it. 5 principles of Kanban. Visualize the workflow, limit work in progress, restrict the amount of work in progress to improve productivity and increase visibility of bottlenecks. 3, manage the flow. 4, make process policies explicit. Clearly explain how things work so the team can have open discussions. And 5, improve collaboratively. Collectively own and improve processes through scientific measurement and experimentation. So we can go very far with this. We can have many more columns, many more parameters. But as someone who is looking to learn this on the first go round, I'd say perfect the to do, do, and done, and move on, scale it up, scale it down as you need. Kanban boards such as this one are low tech. They're high touch technology that may seem overtly simplistic at first, but trust me, I know its power. Utilizing policies for entry and exit to those columns, as well as constraints such as limiting work in progress, Kanban boards provide clear insight to workflow, bottlenecks, blockers, and overall status. Now, remember, this is the short version. There's a much longer version that I will create. But when should you use Kanban? The Agile Practice Guide says flexibility, focus on continuous delivery, increased productivity and quality, increased efficiency, team member focus, variability in the workload, and reduction of waste. Now let's move on to the next topic. Second part of the question is, what is Scrum? Scrum is a framework from the Agile family of methods and frameworks. It's very simple. It starts off with you knowing in a business you need something, and therefore you create a list of those things. We call it a product backlog. Let's keep it simple. The product backlog has a list of things that need to be done. Now, the items in the product backlog, they're not static. You could add to them, you could remove from them. But ultimately, you are going to plan how to take this backlog and how to make this iteration, or potentially shippable increment, I should say. So in order to do that, you're going to plan how much of this can I put into this first iteration? simply refer to that as sprint planning. A sprint is an iteration in the world of Scrum. You conduct sprint planning and you have the beginnings of your sprint backlog. Now, the sprint backlog could at times change, but within the sprint, we want to limit the change that happens to that sprint backlog. You could take an item out of the sprint backlog and put it back into the product backlog, but under most circumstances, we want to limit the amount of change that happens within the sprint. Within the sprint, we carry out something known as a daily Scrum ceremony. The sprint could be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. Some companies do it up to 8 weeks, but that is becoming quite rare these days. So 2 weeks is actually the sweet spot. But we have a daily Scrum ceremony where the team answers the three clarifying questions, the three accountability questions, if you will. And they are, what did you do yesterday? Or what did you do since our last meeting to move us towards the sprint goal? What will you do between now and the next meeting to move us towards the sprint goal? And lastly, are there any blockers or obstacles in your way? The team, also known as the Scrum team, consists of the product owner, the Scrum master, and would call them the development team. They all make up the team. Sometimes we loosely refer to the development team as the team, but the correct lingo is developers, Scrum master, product owner. They make up the Scrum team. Now, as the work is proceeding, there's also something else that should happen. The product backlog should be refined because as you proceed in time and as you boundary span as management, you're spanning the boundaries and looking for what's happening in the environment, external factors, you realize that your backlog needs to change. It needs to be modified, needs to be updated. Things need to be taken out because they're no longer needed as a result of the change in environment, or maybe marketplace conditions have changed and things need to be added. So backlog refinement happens either in the middle somewhere of the sprint or at different points. The product owner is someone who should be constantly priming the backlog and trying to prioritize value in the backlog. As work is proceeding, you eventually are going to get to the end of the sprint. But before you get to the formal end of the sprint, you would have created a potentially shippable increment, and that potentially shippable increment will need to be demoed. It will need to be presented to stakeholders to ensure you're on the right track. That is done in a sprint review ceremony. The term demo is used in conjunction with the sprint review. When all is said and done, there will be a final meeting known as a sprint retrospective ceremony. And the sprint retrospective is just like a lessons learned, only better in that the findings from the retrospective stay with the team. So no one takes the fall or is blamed. There's a term we call Agile Vegas. What happens in the retrospective stays there. And that, my friends, is an overview of Scrum. So let's go over this a little bit more. When we talk about a product backlog, that is everything that has to be done. When we talk about a sprint backlog, that is what we're targeting to do for a particular sprint. When we talk about a sprint, it's a predefined 1 to 4 week period. We call it a time box within which work gets completed. When we talk about the potentially shippable increment or the PSI, we mean the ability at the end of the sprint to introduce whatever was built into a production environment. We can introduce it into production, but we don't have to. Thereby, the word shippable, the ability to place a feature-rich, minimal viable product into the hands of the customer. When we talk about The product owner owns the vision, the backlog content, and priority. In other words, they ensure we're building the right thing. When we talk about the team in this slide, we're really talking about the developers. Now, when we say developers, we don't mean it's all about software. The developers are the people doing the work. At the time we put this together, it was still known as a team, but as at November 2020, that was changed in the Scrum Guide to developers. And last but not least, we have the Scrum Master, and the Scrum Master is your process champion, facilitator, team coach, the person who ensures that order is being followed in the process. And that's why we say they are the process champion. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of the differences. If you are looking to learn a little bit more about the world of Kanban, let me recommend this book to you. And you can see this book. It reads Successful Evolution Change for Your Technology Business by David J. Anderson. That's a good one for you to look at. And the next one is by none other than Ken Schwaber. This is a little bit on the old side, but I like the simplicity in the book. It's called Agile Project Management with Scrum. All right, so I hope you enjoyed both of those two, my friends. If you are looking to learn more about these topics, remember we have training at agileprinciple.com. For those of you getting ready for the PMP exam, the training and coaching is definitely going to help you. All right, so go on down to agileprinciple.com. We look forward to seeing you. Take care and bye for now.